You know what separates a man who makes history from one who just lives in it? It ain't money, it ain't talent. Hell, it ain't even luck. It's something a whole lot deeper than that. Let me tell you a story about a man who had nothing but holes in his shoes and fire in his belly. The kind of fire that keeps burning even when the whole world's trying to put it out. Now picture this. A broke actor standing in some fancy Hollywood office. They're offering him enough money to set him up for life. $360,000. More money than most folks see in a decade. All he has to do is walk away. Let somebody else play the part he wrote. Simple choice, right? Except it wasn't. Not for him. Because sometimes a man's got to stand his ground even when the whole world thinks he's lost his mind. Welcome to Rise Stoically. Now, we ain't here to give you any of that sugar-coated inspiration that melts away faster than a snow cone in July. We're here to dig deep into the real stuff. The kind of wisdom that's been tested by time and proven in the trenches of life itself. What you're about to hear ain't just another Hollywood success story. Hell no. It's about something a lot more powerful than that. See, without even knowing it, Sylvester Stallone was living by the same principles that built empires and forged warriors. And by the time we're done here, you'll know exactly how to use those same principles in your own life. Principle 1. The power of unshakable vision. Let me tell you something about vision. Not the kind you get from your eyes, but the kind that burns in your gut when everybody else thinks you're crazy. There's this image that stuck with me for years. Picture a cold morning in New Jersey, 1975. You got this young fella sleeping on a bus station bench, stomach growling because he hasn't eaten in 2 days. His shoes, more cardboard than leather. But here's the thing that'll knock you sideways. He gets up, dusts himself off, and walks 4 miles to another audition. Not because he thinks he'll make it, but because he knows he will. Now, most folks would have packed it in right there. Found themselves a nice steady job, maybe settled for something comfortable. But comfort, that wasn't even in this fella's vocabulary. The casting director that morning, well, he wasn't what you'd call encouraging. Looked at our boy and said, "Kid, you look like you've been hit by a truck and then somebody backed over you just to make sure. Maybe try being a stuntman, if they're desperate." You know what most people don't catch about that moment? It wasn't just another rejection, it was fuel. Pure, high-octane fuel for what was coming. See, there's this thing that happens when a man's vision is clear enough. The whole world can be telling him no, and all he hears is not yet. That's what Stallone had. Wasn't just hope or dreams or wishes. Was something solid as stone and twice as hard to break. March 24th, 1975. Now that's a date worth remembering. Muhammad Ali's fighting Chuck Wepner, and Stallone, he scrapes together just enough cash to buy a ticket, watching this unknown fighter, this nobody, knock down the greatest heavyweight champion in the world. Something clicked. Right there, in that moment, his whole future played out in front of him, like a movie nobody else could see yet. You want to know what real vision looks like? It looks like a man going home to his tiny apartment, with exactly $106 to his name and a pregnant wife wondering how they're going to make it through the month, and writing for 3.5 days straight. Not eating, barely sleeping, just putting words on paper like his life depended on it. Because in his mind, it did. Now, most folks would tell you that's where the magic happened. But let me tell you something about true vision. That first draft, that was just the beginning. Like a sculptor looking at a block of marble, Stallone knew he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. 33 times. That's how many times he rewrote that script. Every time somebody said no, every time they told him it wasn't good enough, he'd go back and make it better. When they said the boxing scenes felt fake, he rewrote them. When they said the love story wasn't strong enough, he dug deeper. Wasn't just writing anymore. Was like he was carving his future out of pure grit. There were these old-time philosophers, tough sons of guns who built an empire that lasted centuries. They had a word for what Stallone was doing. Called it prohairesis. Fancy way of saying when a man sees his path so clear that nothing else matters. Not hunger, not cold, not what anybody else thinks. While he was working as an usher at that movie theater, wasn't just cleaning up spilled popcorn, no sir. He was studying every frame of every film that played, working at that zoo, cleaning those lion cages. He wasn't just shoveling waste, he was watching how power moves. Even took a part in one of those adult films just to keep his lights on. But you know what? Even then, he was learning, watching, getting ready. Hell, most folks would have been embarrassed about that last part, but when you got a vision burning bright enough, everything else is just fuel for the fire. Principle 2, making friends with your devils. Now let me tell you something that might just change the way you look at every problem you've ever had. You know that famous Stallone voice, the one everybody knows, came from something that should have ended his dream before it started. See, when he was born, doctors had to use these special forceps. Something went wrong and they ended up severing a nerve. Left part of his face paralyzed, tongue, lip, chin. Growing up, kids called him monkey face. Teachers would ask him to sit in the back of the class because his way of talking was distracting. Most folks would try to hide something like that, cover it up, make excuses, but this story ain't about most folks. 1973, Stallone's at this audition. Casting director stops him right in the middle of his line, says, "I don't mean to be rude, son, but do you realize you talk funny?" Now, here's where it gets good. Instead of apologizing for his voice, instead of trying to change it, Stallone did something that'd make those old philosophers proud. He doubled down on it. When he wrote Rocky, he didn't just work around his voice. He built the whole damn character on it. That famous "Yo, Adrian" wasn't just a line. Was Stallone taking what everybody said was his weakness and turning it into his calling card? There was this philosopher back in ancient times, fella named Epictetus. Now, he wasn't born into anything fancy. Matter of fact, he was born a slave, had a permanent limp from being tortured. But he said something that Stallone lived out without ever knowing it. It ain't what happens to you that matters, it's what you do with it. You want to know the real kicker? During those early Rocky readings, some smart fellows in suits suggested they should dub over Stallone's voice. Can you believe that? The very thing that made Rocky real, they wanted to polish right out of existence. But Stallone, he knew something most folks never figure out. Sometimes your biggest problem is hiding your greatest gift. When them studio executives said Rocky should talk more normal in the emotional scenes with Adrian, you know what he did? Rewrote those scenes to make Rocky's speech even more pronounced when he was feeling something deep. See, there's a world of difference between accepting your troubles and making friends with them. Accepting, that's just living with something. But making friends with your devils, that's turning them into angels. Principle 3, the kind of action that makes fate blink. Let me paint you a picture of what real dedication looks like. Sun ain't even thinking about rising yet in New York City, 1975. 4:30 in the morning, and while the whole city's still dreaming, there's this fella already up in his beat-up apartment, writing like tomorrow ain't guaranteed. Now here's the part that separates dreamers from doers. In 2 hours, he's got to go clean lion cages at the Central Park Zoo. After that, working as a movie theater usher till midnight. Then, he'll do it all over again tomorrow. And the next day. And the next. But here's what most folks miss about this part of the story. Every single one of those jobs wasn't just about keeping food on the table. They were like pieces of a puzzle he was putting together. Cleaning them lion cages? That was a front row seat to raw power and movement. Working that theater. Free film school, studying every scene, every line, every camera angle like his life depended on it. There's this old saying from one of them ancient wise men, fella named Seneca. He said luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. But here's what most folks get wrong about preparation. It ain't about waiting for your moment. It's about making every moment count. Between them jobs, Stallone would walk to every casting office in Manhattan, not once in a while. Every single week. Rain, snow, didn't matter if it was hot enough to fry an egg on the sidewalk. Got to where casting directors knew him, not because he was the best actor they saw, but because he was the one who kept showing up. Let me tell you something about persistence that might change the way you look at everything you're doing. While he was mopping them theater floors, Stallone kept this little notebook, wrote down every line that hit him just right, every scene that made the audience react. Started practicing those lines while he was cleaning up after shows. One day, some fella catches him acting out a scene with his mop. Instead of being embarrassed, Stallone turns it into an audition right there. Turns out that fella was a drama teacher. Offered him free classes on the spot. Most folks would have been too proud to take charity. But Stallone, he knew something about success that most folks never figure out. It ain't about looking good. It's about getting better. There was this place in Brooklyn, Gleason's Gym. Stallone couldn't afford boxing lessons, so you know what he did. Offered to clean the equipment just to stay in the gym longer. Watch them fighters like a hawk. How they moved, how they talked, how they carried themselves when they were bone-tired and hurting. That ain't research from no book, that's learning written in sweat. And when that moment finally came, when he got them 28 days to shoot Rocky, most folks would have crumbled under that kind of pressure. But Stallone, he was ready. Every early morning writing session, every odd job, every rejection. They weren't just things that happened to him, they were preparation for this very moment. Indie Principle 4, the courage to bet on yourself. Now here's where this story takes a turn that'll make you question everything you think you know about success. Picture this moment with me. Late 1975, Stallone standing in some producer's office. His wife's 8 months pregnant. They got exactly $106 in the bank. Power companies already turned off their electricity. And these producers, they're pushing a check across that desk, $360,000. There's a catch. Always is, ain't there? They want somebody else to play Rocky, Ryan O'Neal, Burt Reynolds, anybody but this unknown kid with the funny voice and the hungry eyes. Now let me tell you something about real courage. It ain't about not being scared. It's about being scared down to your bones and standing your ground anyway. These producers, they tried everything. Bumped the offer up to $425,000. Told him he was committing career suicide. One of them even leaned across that desk and said, "Son, you do realize you look nothing like a leading man, right?" You know what happened when Stallone walked out of that office. He had to walk home, couldn't even afford bus fare. His wife was fit to be tied. His agent thought he'd lost his mind. Even his mama called to tell him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. And just when you think things couldn't get any tougher, Stallone made one of the hardest decisions of his life. He sold his beloved dog Butkus for $50 to keep the lights on. Can you imagine that? Selling your best friend just to survive. But here's the part that'll knock you sideways. After Rocky became a success, Stallone tracked down the man he sold Butkus to and bought him back for $3,000. That ain't just loyalty, that's the kind of heart you can't fake. There was this old-time Roman named Cato, tough old bird who once said something that fits this moment perfect. A man starts speaking his truth when staying quiet hurts worse than speaking up. That's where Stallone was. Wasn't just fighting for a role in some movie, was fighting for his vision of what was possible. When they finally gave in, let him play Rocky, they cut that budget down to barely nothing. 28 days to shoot the whole thing. Couldn't even afford enough extras for that fight scene. Had to shoot with half them seats empty. First week of filming, crew members were taking bets on how many days before they'd fire him. Cinematographer said his face was all wrong for the camera. Boxing coordinator said he moved like he had 2 left feet. But here's the thing about betting everything on yourself. When you got nothing left to lose, you got everything to gain. Stallone threw himself into that role like a man possessed. Did his own stunts. Took a real punch from Carl Weathers that cracked his ribs. Showed up 2 hours early every single day, practicing every move, every line, like his life depended on it. Because in his mind, it did. Principle 5. The kind of confidence you can't fake. Let me tell you something about real confidence. It ain't something you can buy, can't borrow it, can't fake it. It's something you got to earn, one hard day at a time. Picture this. First day of filming Rocky. Stallone standing in that meat locker getting ready to shoot that famous scene where he's punching them sides of beef. Crew's looking at him sideways. Producers are nervous as long-tailed cats in a room full of rocking chairs. And Stallone hasn't slept in 2 days because he's been rewriting scenes to save money on the budget. But when that director yells action, something magical happens. Every punch Stallone throws ain't just a punch. It's 5 years of rejection turned into pure power. Every grunt ain't just acting. It's the sound of a man who's fought for every breath of this moment. Them old philosophers had a word for this kind of knowing. Called it catalepsis. Fancy way of saying the kind of knowledge that comes from living something, not just learning about it. The kind of confidence that's earned in blood and sweat and tears. Before they started filming, Stallone spent 3 months training with this old boxing trainer named Jimmy Gambino. Studio didn't ask him to. Hell, they couldn't afford a proper training budget. He did it because he needed to earn the right to be Rocky, not just play him, be him. You want to know what earned confidence looks like? While everybody else was sleeping, Stallone would sneak onto that film set at night, practice his movements, feel the space, make it his own. Security guard caught him a few times, but eventually just started letting him in. Said something that tells you everything you need to know. Anyone who wants it, this bad, deserves a shot. That transformation was so complete that Carl Weathers, fella playing Apollo Creed, said something powerful. When we were filming, I forgot I was working with the writer. Far as I was concerned, I was fighting Rocky Balboa. See, earned confidence carries a different weight to it. When Stallone had to convince Burgess Meredith to play Mickey for hardly any money, it wasn't just sweet talk that won him over. It was the absolute certainty that came from having lived every word of that script. Meredith took one look in Stallone's eyes and said, "This ain't just another movie for this kid. This is his life." By the time that movie premiered, Stallone had faced more than 1,500 rejections, worked over 30 different jobs, rewrote that script 33 times, trained until his bones ached and his muscles screamed. That ain't just preparation. That's earning the right to be who you're meant to be. You know what makes this story stick to your ribs? It ain't just that Stallone made it. It's how he made it, living by principles so deep and true that them old philosophers wrote about 'em thousands of years ago. Never read a word of their writings, but he lived every letter of their wisdom. That fire in his belly that kept him going through all them rejections, that's the same thing Marcus Aurelius wrote about in his private journals. Taking what everybody said was his biggest weakness and turning it into his signature strength. That's exactly what Epictetus was teaching all them years ago. Every principle we talked about tonight, they ain't just parts of some success story. They're truth, pure as mountain water and twice as refreshing. Let me tell you something about changing your life. It don't happen in one big moment. Happens in all them small moments nobody sees, when you're tired, when the odds are stacked against you, when everything in you wants to quit, but you keep going anyway. Think about where Stallone was standing in '75, broke as the 10 Commandments, having to sell his dog just to keep the lights on. By any logical thinking, he should have taken that money and counted his blessings, but there's something more powerful than logic. It's knowing bone deep who you are and what you're meant to do. These principles we talked about tonight, they ain't just for making movies. They're for making your life into something worth talking about. Don't matter if you're writing a script or building a business or trying to turn your life around. The principles, they're the same as they've always been. Every time you choose your vision over other folks' doubts, you're walking this same path. Every time you take what life gave you and turn it into something powerful, you're walking this path. Every time you take action when you're scared, every time you stand your ground when it'd be easier to fold. Every time you earn your confidence through hard work, instead of hoping it'll just show up one day. You're walking this path. Here's what I want you to think about. What's your Rocky moment going to be? What's that dream you've been holding back on? What's that thing everybody says you can't do that you know in your bones you were meant to do? Remember this. Stallone didn't become Rocky by following somebody else's map. He became Rocky by living these principles every single day in his own way. And that's exactly what I'm asking you to do. If this story lights a fire in your belly, if you're ready to live these principles in your own life, make sure you're part of our community. Hit that subscribe button, share this video with somebody who needs to hear it, and tell us in them comments about your own Rocky moment, the one you're working toward right now. And stay tuned, because next time, we're going to talk about another unlikely champion. Another story about somebody who took their biggest weakness and turned it into their defining strength. Remember this, friends. Success ain't about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about taking these timeless principles and living them in every moment you got. Now get out there and make your story one worth telling, round fires like this one.